Janine Moloff, who's an online journalist, and Sylvester Brown, When We Dream Together. As we begin, we're asking our panelists, we allow 10 minutes presentation. To keep everybody on target with the 10 minutes, we have a timekeeper. Our timekeeper is Brother Ken.
Hollenbeck.
Yeah, Hollenbeck. And when you get to the minutes, how many minutes? You got in
5, 3, and 1.
Okay, 5 minutes kind of alert you that you should be getting to wind down. 3 minutes, come closer to winding down, and 1 minute means that you only got 1 more minute, for your presentation. Afterwards, we will open it up for questions and comments. So to that end, we're going to begin with Janine Moloff, online journalist. So let's give her a round of applause. Oh, I'm sorry.
My voice doesn't go in here.
Well, maybe.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to explain that I'm kind of new to the whole online journalism gig. I'm an urban educator in special education, and I came to the online journalism thing a couple of years ago with Huffington Post's first version of Off the Bus. My first editor was Mark Cooper, who was also with The Nation. Needless to say, he was tough. When we talk about silencing our voices in corporate control of media, we have to look at really an entire history. This did not happen overnight. Kind of bear with me because I'm doing this extemporaneous. There's been consolidation of media for some time, but in 1996, under the Clinton administration, the telecom bill allowed for further consolidation of corporate media. Now, why is consolidation of media so important? It lessens how many voices are heard. It makes sure that the voices that are heard are those that reflect massive corporate interest as opposed to basically what may be important to the community and the country at large. A good example is there's a big furor about the Keystone XL pipeline. I was one of the early writers. I did an early piece about the Keystone XL, and when a lot of people weren't really paying attention to it. And the fact is that there are big corporate interests that they'll have commercials about tar sands. They call it oil sands, and they say it's going to bring jobs, and there's very little analysis. If you notice, when you look at the television news, for instance, you will see a lot of flash, obviously a lot of style, or whatever you want to call it, but there's very few corroborated facts. So what I did was I built on stuff that, for instance, a group called Inside Climate News did. They did some phenomenal work, but if I downloaded every bit of research that they did, it would have been a book this thick. So then I had to connect the dots, because the average person isn't necessarily going to read this. So I had to connect the dots and see what are the facts scientifically, and what are the facts in terms of a legal conflict of interest. Well, there was plenty. This is something that, at least early on, a year ago, because it first published in March and April of last year in different publications. This is something you would not have seen on the NBC Nightly News, or it would have been slanted in such a way that they would have left out the fact that one of the people helping control the environmental protection study, for one thing, had no background in science. He was a graduate of Fordham University. He used to work for Hillary Clinton, and his whole background was in public relations. Again, that doesn't make for good science, and it definitely doesn't make for good policy. What are the ramifications, for instance, of that particular example? Very simply this. The pipeline route is to go through an area where the Ogallala Aquifer is, which basically is where we get most of our water. And it's not like you turn on a spigot and the oil flows through. This is basically rocks and sand, and it's jetted through under high pressure. They wanted to use thinner than normal steel. There had already been a major rupture. And this stuff is so toxic that if it gets even into a little bit of our water supply is ruined. Those little details were kind of left out by corporate news. And the fact is, that is because of greater consolidation. We don't have an American version of the BBC. Earlier on, there was a little act called the NDAA. which looked like a defense authorization bill. But in fact, it allowed the president, any president, to scrap what was left of the Bill of Rights. It basically said anybody could be gitmoized and called either a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer based on any president's say-so. No evidence was necessary. They could basically detain you indefinitely, which means that they could just make you go away. They could put you in jail forever. Anything could happen. You had no right to legal counsel, nothing. By the way, that bill was passed, and it was passed by Dem and Republican alike. Again, I was one of the early writers that did a very long piece about that. These are the things you don't hear in corporate news, or they'll downplay it. The fact is this: you get the kind of government you deserve. And if journalism is supposed to be the fourth estate, then we really have to know what's going on in our communities. That requires more work. I do this part-time. I mean, I work full-time at a totally different job, and then I basically don't sleep, and I stay up and dig this stuff up. So we have the telecom bill. Then we have the blending of news and entertainment. This is another factor. Very bad idea. You don't want news to be boring, obviously. I mean, it doesn't need to be a laundry list. But the fact is, it also you need to have people that are credible, that actually know what they're talking about. To have newstainment, that's akin to basically having Kim Kardashian comment on brain surgery. It's not going to be too good a fix. So you have that. Then you have the ongoing fight over objectivity or impartiality. And I do think that if it's a news article, you know, it should be news. However, every news article, I understand, has a slant. When I write an op-ed or an editorial, it's clearly labeled an op-ed or an editorial. What's happened with corporate news is that they insist, you've heard the phrase fair and balanced? Yeah, they have to have basically tit for tat. And if you don't have that balance, they say, oh, well, you can't run it. Well, that means all a public official has to do is stonewall you, and the story goes nowhere. And the fact is, the theft of our civil liberties, which is one of the things that I'm really big on, it did not happen just by George W. Bush. It would be too much fun to blame it all on him. But the fact is, it started dating all the way back to Nixon, and then Carter, and so on, Ford. I mean, the whole bit, it started with the Nixon and Ford party. And Bill Clinton did some things in the '96 anti-crime bill that stole some of our liberties as well. Again, all you heard was spin. You got slogans. You can't be a vibrant, participatory democracy if the only thing you have to measure it by are slogans and spin. And the fact is, I know when I call the U.S. Congress and ask, like when I called Senator Levin's press secretary to ask about the NDAA, because he was one of the sponsors, they like to give you a nonsense answer. And I know that if I keep pushing it, they're not going to say anything to me again. That's okay. Because what I'm going to say is I contacted them X number of times. I received no response if that was the case. And then I go on and I ask those questions, even in the absence of a response from them, because it makes people think. If we keep asking the hard questions and pushing them, even if they totally walk away from us, that says quite a bit about their intentions. And then the question's out there. And the problem with too much corporate news, they stopped asking the tough questions by and large because, again, they didn't want access cut off. Well, you know what? If our political leaders are giving us nonsense, the political equivalent of the dog ate my homework, they've already cut us off. We need to push and insist on asking these tough questions, and when they don't give us an answer, sir, madam, you did not answer my question. I will rephrase it. But this is what we have to do, because right now, we're at a crossroads. Our democracy is pretty much barely on life support. The Bill of Rights has been shredded. And frankly, the only way we're going to start to get it back, people need to know what's going on, and that means that journalists have to be willing to ask tough questions. That's why the whole WikiLeaks thing is so critically important, regardless of what you think about Julian Assange, because frankly, that was information we needed to know. And I don't care if it's Bill Keller or not. He was wrong. We had a right to know, and the government did not have a right to withhold that information. They arbitrarily call anything secret or classified with no proof. We're not allowed to do that. They shouldn't either. Is that it? Am I down to 1 minute or what?
Right.
Not quite? Okay. And I did do an article, for instance, on WikiLeaks, and basically it started out with Bill Keller's wrong. He's wrong about WikiLeaks, he's wrong about Julian Assange, and he's wrong about the role of journalism in a vibrant democracy. So the fact is, government and journalists, we shouldn't be buddies. We should have a very difficult relationship because our job is to get the truth from them, especially when they're beholden to the very, very rich. And if we're too frightened to do that, then, well, we may as well just pull up stakes and go home because it's over. That's it.
For our next panelist, let me just digress for a second. I think it's very important in the spirit of what we're doing this evening to read our statement for tonight's program. It goes as such: corporations are consolidating their control of media, making it harder and harder to hear alternative views. This is happening for independent papers, TV, and radio. Yet we are living in a time when it is increasingly important to get the message out on never-ending war, rampant racist violence, job disappearance, economic collapse, and environmental annihilation. Instead of protecting those who reveal the truth, the government is working closer with those who would silence dissent. Is there a way forward? Can our voices be heard despite these trends? Just want to put that on everybody's mind, the theme for this evening. Continuing, our next presenter will be Don Corrigan with the Webster Kirkwood Times.
Thanks. Is this working?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for the invitation to be here tonight. I'm in community journalism, and there's about 4 or 5 of us that started a newspaper from scratch, the Webster Kirkwood Times. Actually, it was the Webster Times first. Then it became the Webster Kirkwood Times. We started the South County Times a few years after that, and we purchased the West End Word just last April, so a year ago. So I know this is part of our circulation area with the West End Word, so we welcome contributions, welcome letters, welcome feedback, so please keep us in mind for that. I think community journalism is really the future of journalism, at least print journalism, because as you notice with the Post-Dispatch or all the big dailies around the country, they're all taking hits. We used to be approached to be bought out by a lot of big companies, but right now the big companies are so concerned with trying to hold on to what they have that they're not really taking a look at us quite as much. And I think print journalism, they're just scared of where things are going. I noticed that the Philadelphia Inquirer, which a few years ago was estimated to be worth $500 million, just sold for 1/10 of that. So it shows where the newspapers are going, and I don't really revel in that fact. I don't really rejoice in that. But I think that shows where community journalism is. I wear a second hat. I also teach journalism at Webster University, and that's what I tell my students. I say, don't think you're going to get on at the New York Times or at the Washington Post or at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch because they're shedding jobs. And they've been shedding jobs since 2008. So I tell them, think about being entrepreneurs. Think about starting your own neighborhood weekly newspaper. That's what we did. My colleagues with that newspaper. Think about blogs. Think about going on the internet. I think you need to do all those things. So I know the topic tonight is about corporate media and is corporate media silencing us. I think I'm just going to focus on one particular phenomenon when it comes to corporate media, and that is News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, because that is the biggest disaster for media in this country. For one thing, they changed the whole way journalism is done. They politicized it, But what is really Orwellian about what they've done, Newspeak, is they run around